Together. And now I'll call us to order because Michelle's almost to her seat. All right. So I just want to go over a couple of things and clarify a couple of things. We had an error on our weekly agenda, and we did not post that we would discuss and work 2299. And I think that is a bill that people have a lot of strong feelings about, and I want to be very transparent and allow people to have time. So we will work, discuss, and take action on that bill on Monday. I'm still trying to prevent us from having to meet on Friday. But in fairness to everybody, because I didn't know if anybody wanted time for amendments or anything, I wanted to be, take our time rather than rush and make a mistake. Because of the snowstorm, our daily agenda did not get updated. We're somewhat going back to yesterday's agenda for the meeting we didn't have, and we will hear a presentation from KSDE on preschools, and it's actually very well timed. I think you may have noticed on the floor that we had 2101 referred back to 2102 referred back to committee because my ranking member had noticed that we had left out preschools, and preschools on the advanced enrollment for military personnel was very complicated. And I want to thank Dr. Harwood from this Department of Education for working with us on that one and helping us to have the right language. And so I am going to open up discussion and action on 2102 and recognize Representative Stogsdill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have an amendment to basically add preschool to the list of classes and so on that military families can apply for early admission.
Thank you. Is there a second? Representative Ruiz. And I will give you guys a chance to read that over, and then we can have discussion. Representative Hill. We do not. It was referred back to committee, so we can look at it fresh. And I think we had all expressed a desire, if it was possible, to include preschool. And our reviser, Dr. Harwood, and several committee members worked on that over the snow day. And we're very productive. And we now have language that allows us to do that. No, listen, I appreciate you doing that because a lot of times people are afraid to do that. And I want to go slow enough to be clear, because I am a fast-talking Cuban. So, any other discussion on that? All right, seeing none, I will call the question. Those in favor? Oh, I'm sorry, Representative Brantley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to clarify that within this bill, is preschool underneath our mode of responsibility as far as education, or is that under another area?
That would be I believe that would be underneath our mode of education, and I will call Dr. Harwood up to answer that question because I want to make sure that we're all comfortable. But we had the issue of you have to be qualified for certain preschools, so the language was written in a way that if you're qualified, it's very similar to the language we used or the concept we use for open enrollment.
Okay. I just want to clarify that there's not a statute or something that somewhere it says education is K-12, and then we're on is that just budget?
I'll let Dr. Harwood answer that one for us.
So early childhood education rests in several different places. There is 3- and 4-year-old education that is specifically part of public schools, which would be what this committee does. So and that's really kind of the reasons why there are so many caveats and the if with the language. But all school districts are required to provide 3 and 4-year-old education for students identified with special needs. So that would be, so every school district has some form of pre-K. Smaller districts may do it as part of a co-op, so it's not in their district, but they would have to have that somewhere. Then through the funding formula for public schools, there is 3 and 4-year-old at risk. And then there's also a pre-K pilot program, which we send the money out for, but actually kind of comes through some other departments. So early childhood is all over the board. This amendment only applies to preschool that is provided in a public school.
Yes, you may.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you, Dr. Harwood. So then, should this actually say, since the preschool that's being offered through the district is for special education preschool?
So actually, the school can have a wide range. Some schools have universal pre-K and provide for everybody. There are really 4 different funding streams that school districts use. One is special ed, one is at risk, the next is the pre-K pilot program, and I'm going to call.
Dr. Harwood, may I interrupt? Lynette, there's water in the fridge in my office that I think Representative Neighbor might enjoy. Thank you, Dr. Harwood.
And then the other one I'm going to call other, but that actually could be funding that the general fund or supplemental general fund. It could be fee for service. Schools are allowed to charge parents for pre-K programs as long as they're not funded through another source. And so since all pre-K students are only funded from the state at 0.5, some programs only charge for the afternoon or the morning, whichever one is not funded. So because this amendment is, and I'll let the revisor make sure that I'm correct on this, because this amendment is stuck in with military students enrolling in a school district, it's tied only to that. But then it says, if the school has a program and the student is qualified for that program, and there are open seats, otherwise they go on a waiting list. And then that last sentence is kind of important, is that nothing about this would require a district to start a program that they don't already have.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm not sure, we don't need to clarify that a little bit more, but
Let me refer
that to you.
I think Representative Brantley is wanting to make sure that this is limited to public school preschools.
Yes, because if you say the pre-kindergarten or pre-K program, I mean, I just think there's, like he said, there's 4 different ways it's funded, but it's still a pre-K program. Does this need to be more specific, or is that okay?
I think it's okay because we're talking about school district, which has a legal definition, but let me turn to the expert, Jason.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, we don't describe specific pre-kindergarten program because, as Dr. Hardwood described, there are different types of programs that school districts offer. So this language states that the first condition is that a school district, which is a public school district as defined by law, offers a pre-kindergarten program, and that would be up to the district. And then if the military student is eligible to participate in that program, so if it is just a special education pre-kindergarten program and the child is not qualified for special education, then they would not be eligible to participate. But if the student is eligible to participate and the student provides evidence that their parent is going to be stationed at a military installation in the state, then they could enroll in that pre-kindergarten program prior to establishing residency in the state.
Representative Brantley.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Jason, for that. So, and I'm trying to play devil's advocate here. So if I enroll my pre-K child, it says if the school district offers pre-K, and my child is not isn't identified to be able to participate, does that open us up just as pre-K program? I mean, can that be construed as not well-defined?
Madam Chair, members of the committee, if the district offers a pre-K program and the student is not eligible to participate in that program, the language down the last sentence states that the district is not required to offer a different preschool program for that student. It is not required to offer any additional pre-kindergarten programs that it is not already offering or required to offer by law.
Thank you, Jason. So that's why we keyed in on qualified, and we also were very careful that we didn't create a need for a district to create a pre-K because they take special ed and special ed only.
That last sentence, and my apologies, that last sentence does clarify that. I just wanted to make sure that was correct. Thank you.
No, those are good questions. I'd rather you guys give things a fine look, and because sometimes we catch something, and that's important to include. Jason?
Additionally, Madam Chair, members of the committee, I just want to point out that the way this would be amended on page 1 of the bill, the last sentence regarding IEPs and 504 plans would be moved to its own subsection so that it would apply both to military students in pre-kindergarten programs and military students in K through 12 programs, because there are IEPs for pre-K students. So I just want to make sure that that's clarified for the committee as well.
Thank you very much, Jason. Any further discussion? Seeing none, before we close this topic, I saw that Lieutenant Colonel Marshall came in, and he was one of these snow day angels, I believe, helping to iron out language that worked for all of us. And again, I thank everybody who did that. Representative Stogsdill, would you like to close your amendment?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I close.
I'll call the question. Those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign, and the motion carries. So, and that was wonderful teamwork. You guys have really made this year very special, and I appreciate that. Yes, I do. Jason. The chair recognizes Representative Stogsdill for a motion to recommend the bill favorably and allow the revisor to make necessary, as amended, and allow the revisor to make technical changes.
I move to move the bill out of committee favorably and with amendments.
And allow the revisor.
And allow the
I have a second from Representative Hubert. Is there discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. And we are signed, sealed, and delivered, and including pre-K. Okay. There was another bill that I had referred back to committee, which was Bill 2033, which we have called the MSLEC. And if you're trying to jog your memory, that was having any organization that is accredited by MSLEC, which is the International Multisensory Structured Language of Education Council. I wanted to bring that back. Anyway, that an MSLEC organization would be added to be qualified to the at-risk list. I brought that bill back because I wanted to check some of the language, and we had a discussion about shalls and mays. And once I brought it back, I realized that I didn't want to make a change, and the chair recognizes the vice chair for a motion.
Madam Chair, I make a motion that we report on House Bill 2033 favorably.
Do I have a second? Representative Schreiber, and is there discussion? Seeing none, I will call the question. Those in favor, please say aye.
aye.
Opposed, same sign. Okay, very good. That takes care of our business today. And just a reminder, Monday, we will discuss and work 2299. We will hear the bill, I don't remember the number in front of me, but the cameras on school bus arms. And I believe we will have time to hear a bill that was introduced late, 2330, on Ruby Bridges walks to school. Because you guys had a lot of questions about preschool and we realized it was more complicated than we thought, ksde volunteered to tell us a little bit about the types of preschools we have now. So we're going to hear from Dr. Harwood again.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, glad to be back with you today. Frank Harwood, Deputy Commissioner for the Kansas State Department of Education. So some of what I was going to say I already said because it was important for the last discussion. The reason that there are so many kind of caveats in the motion, and the reason when this got brought up when the bill was originally being worked last week, is that pre-K is pretty complicated. And that's because the funding sources, there are several different funding sources, and no one funding source kind of pays for everything. And so just to kind of start back a little bit, to repeat a little bit what I've said, public schools are only required to provide pre-K 3- and 4-year-old services, and actually some of it can go back all the way to birth, depending on it, but not at school, for students with disabilities. And so that student would have an IEP. There is a program called Child Find, which is a requirement where the school districts are required to try to identify students that have special needs. One of the really important ways we do that is Parents as Teachers, which is a great program for any young parent. And quite frankly, if you know young parents that are struggling with, is my kid normal? Because every parent asks that. Parents as Teachers is a great way to do that. They're also trained to identify things that might be a concern where that student could get tested for something going on. So that's the part that has to be done. Some of those are in-home services before 3, and then 3- and 4-year-olds can come to school. Those are half-day programs. So any 3 or 4-year-old is counted as a 0.5 funding in the funding formula, and then there's also special education funding attached based on staff that you hire and transportation, those kinds of things. The next funding piece from the state is at-risk, pre-K at-risk. And so for these sort of students that have to be identified with an at-risk identifier, they have to meet a qualification. One is free lunch. One is single mothers. There are other things like English language learners, families, and a number of other things, but they have to meet one of those criteria in order to get a slot that is paid for with state funds. Next, there is the pre-K pilot, and I say pre-K pilot because it's been a pilot since 2018. So this is one of those things that probably needs to come up with the Education Funding Task Force, is that if we're going to keep doing it, we probably ought to just roll it into the funding formula as opposed to doing it the way we're doing it. But I think that's one of the things that we have to talk about is that, what is public schools' function in pre-K? The next part, so the pre-K, the pre-K pilot, in order to be qualified for the pre-K pilot, half of the students that you're serving in pre-K have to be low income. So there are some parts to that. It's not a lot of funding. I think it's like $8 million statewide, and so they can only do so many grants with that. The at-risk pilot used to be limited to 4-year-old, or the at-risk, early pre-K at-risk used to be limited to 4-year-olds, and then it was 3-year-olds if we could afford them, and now we've gotten to the point where we fund all 3 or 4-year-olds that are enrolled on September 20th in an approved program. You have to have an approved program to do that. So those are the funding streams that go to school districts, and then school districts can do other things on top of that. One is, especially for the students with special needs, part of that is that districts are encouraged to have non-disabled peers working with them. So you'll hear a term called peer model. And so you'll have students that are there in preschool that aren't paying anything because they have a disability, and then you also might have other students there that could be charged a fee to be there as peer models. You can put the the IDEA money, the special ed money, along with the at-risk money, and this is what district we call to as braiding funds. So you take all three funding streams and you figure out how to tie them all together to build the best system you can and not break any of the rules of any of the different funding streams. And so that's a lot of what's happening. So then on top of that, if you have room, some districts are doing universal pre-K. And then it's just based on the student situation, whether or not the parent pays anything for that or not. Other districts have been hesitant to do that because of pre-K opportunities that are out in the community. So then it's because you get into that part of, am I using taxpayer dollars to cut off somebody's business? So that's happened in different districts, typically very small. In rural districts, there is no place other than some home daycares. And so it is the only preschool system there. So each community kind of figures that out. They can also apply for other non-state grants, or there could be other state grants, but not through the Department of Education, and they tie all those things together. So when we were trying to put this language together, what we didn't want to do is have language that was going to require a district to start a pre-K program that they didn't already have. And what I talked about before is those special education programs in some of our very small districts, they may be part of a co-op and are a local, and so that program is happening 25 miles away and is only for students that qualify with an IEP. And so I kind of gave Jason a hard time. I had a 2-line motion to make, and Jason turned it into a whole paragraph, because that's what you need to make sure that what I tried to convey will stand up as a statute. So that's a real brief overview of just the different processes and in the different funding streams.
We're going to pause for questions. I've got a quick one. Did you say, and then I'll go to Representative Hubert, when you talked about IDA and at-risk, did you say braiding? B-R-A-I-D?
Yeah, braiding the funds. And so that you can actually use at-risk students as peer models for disabled students. And so you're trying to tie all those together. The other part that I probably should have mentioned with that is that some districts, and if they have that half-day program for that, offer for pay the rest of the day, because that actually is a difficult thing for parents to come to a half-day preschool, and then you got to figure out what you're doing with the rest of the day. Sometimes it works out well, sometimes it doesn't work out so well.
Very good. Representative Hubert.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The pilot discussion you had, is that what happened at the state board meeting Tuesday afternoon? I know that was a consent agenda, and then there was some discussion delaying it, but ultimately they decided to go ahead and approve that. Is that what you're talking about there?
So I will have to go back and look, because I was over here when that was going on over there.
I think it was, but I just thought you might be able to clarify. So
the pre-K pilot is state funding, but the state board could have had some approval they needed to do with that. So
okay, thank you.
Representative Steele.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Dr. Harwood. On the pre-K pilot, are those students, they're not SPED and they're not at risk, so what's the difference? How would it be from a pre-K pilot to others? So who decides who pays and who's under the pilot?
So what the district would do is apply for the pre-K pilot grant. There are eligibility criteria. One is 50% of the students are low income. After that, the grant money applies to the program. So then the district could use those funds to reduce what they charge to other students that aren't funded under at-risk or special education.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Representative Hill, and then we'll let Dr. Harwood proceed. It's always a challenge of when do you let questions go? When you're right there on that topic, or at the end and you try to rush them in? Representative Hill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Dr. Harwood. Question, you kind of went through those 4 different funding streams, but you didn't really talk to us about the prevalence of pre-K programs throughout the state. How many kids are we talking about?
I should have looked at that before I came. We would really only know specifically the students that are counted as for special education or for at-risk. Districts that are doing something beyond that, they don't turn in for funding, so we wouldn't necessarily have a good count of that. I can talk to our early childhood folks and see if they have a better number for that. Because the other thing that districts do is partner with other community agencies to provide some of those. So we can tell you how many the state is funding, and I can get that number later today. But I'll try to find out if we know just how many are in public pre-K programs.
Is there funding on the pilot pre-K too? You didn't mention those.
So the pre-K pilot has $8 million, a little over $8 million statewide.
Okay,
It's a
and,
grant program.
and is all of the funding based off of 0.5?
So so for the pre-K at risk and for the special education students that are qualified for state aid, they are automatically counted as 0.5.
And that is the 0.5 FT, or, yeah, okay.
They would get half of whatever the base aid
Base is,
so 53,
okay.
78. half of
Okay,
that this year.
but the pilot is not?
It's not.
How is it, oh, it's just a total amount?
There's an $8 million, a little over $8 million pot of money, and then based on the applications, that gets distributed.
Okay, thank you, Prince.
Okay, Dr. Harwood, we kind of interrupted your flow, and I'm
Okay.
sorry.
So that was important. The only other really thing to add is that preschool or pre-K is very community dependent. Districts that are declining in enrollment and have space sometimes are looking for ways to use the space, and so they start exploring the idea of, does our community need a preschool that should be run by the school district? Districts that are growing typically are more in this place where they're going to do what they have to do, but it's difficult then to just have the space to add in programs. So this would be just one of those things that comes up if the state went forward with any type of required pre-K. There would be a lot of school districts that would have to add space and would not have space to do anything universal. Other districts are already doing it. So it's just that's going to be a difficult one to solve kind of universally, because the problem has been solved locally for so long that then when you start to try to do a one-size-fits-all thing, everybody's got a different size going on. So those will just be considerations about if that were going to happen. It would have to be phased in for some districts because they would actually need to do maybe even bond issues in order to construct spaces. Others would say, yeah, well, we're already doing that. We'd be happy to take state funding versus charging parents or however that would work.
Questions for Dr. Harwood? Okay, Dr. Okay. Dr. Harwood, I thank you so much for sharing this with us, because really until it came up with the advanced enrollment, I don't think it's something that we thought of very often. And I know we put a lot of work on your shoulders. And I've asked Elena for research to kind of put together a document that we can walk away with, because committee, I really wanted you to get a strong understanding of this information, because when we go to the funding formula task force, this is knowledge that you might want to be able to refer back to it at some point. Did I hear a question to my right, Representative Brantley?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dr. Harwood, do they only do the pre-K screening in the spring, or will they do it again in the fall?
So some of that's going to be a local decision. Some districts actually do it throughout the year at different times. So some things you think about is like kindergarten roundup, which happens in the spring, and that has changed so much over the years that some of it's really just an enrollment time versus any type of screening. So typically, if a district is made aware of a student that may have a disability, there's actually a time frame in which they have to do the evaluation. So they may put out a call or advertise that they're going to do something at some time, but if they're made aware of it another time, they would have to work on it at that time.
Okay, so Madam Chair, may I ask one more?
You may.
So along with when we were talking about the military, if a family would move in at a certain point, they could be able to have that screening and go ahead and enroll.
Yes, so I think with the way the bill would read is that in order to enroll right then, they would have to show that they are qualified for that. But if they move in and they don't, currently the child is 3 years old and hasn't been screened and doesn't have an IEP, once they get there, the screening could be done, and then the district would have to provide the service once the IEP is written. So all of those would be true.
Thank you. Representative Hill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And this is maybe kind of a follow-up on something you said a little bit ago, and you talked about that the decision to have a pre-K is a community-based decision. And would you explain that a little bit more? That's put up to a vote of the people then? Is that what they do?
So, no, I mean, it would be, the school board would vote to do it.
Oh, so it's a school board.
So the school board would have to decide whether you're going to devote resources in that direction. They're going to do that so the administration could come and say, we need to do a preschool for everybody. The school board might say, yeah, I don't think we want to go there because we have all these other options that we'd want to interfere with. It could also happen the other way, is that parents are going to the school board and say, we need to do this, and the school board directs the administration to figure out how to do it. But the local school board would be the only ones required to vote on it. If they decided, and many districts have, to do bond issues to build early childhood centers, then that's how everybody would vote on it.
Okay, thank you for clarifying.
Thank you. Representative Steele.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Okay, so just a point of clarification. You said that it's the local school board's decision, but earlier you said that school districts are required to do child find. So can you?
So what I meant, it would be the local school board's decision to expand beyond what's required under IDEA for special education students. They don't have a choice about that. But so I think what we were talking about is more expanding to identified students, either at risk or special ed. If you wanted to expand beyond that, that's a local decision.
I just wanted to make sure that, okay. Thank you.
Right,
Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome. Do we have additional questions? Representative Neighbor. And I apologize, I forgot to give you the official welcome and thank you for being here today.
Oh, thank you. Been on a school board for over 30 years. One of the things that the feds always require, and is still a requirement today, is if a special ed student comes into your district, you have 10 days to get them where they need to be in the classes, enrolled for have an IEP and a plan for them. So when you look at the special ed in preschool, you can kind of look at those kind of guidelines because they want to make it as quick as possible. One, there are there still numbers, teacher ratio to students on pre-K or special ed in the pre-K program? Because I know there is for autism. I worked in that, but I don't know on some of the others.
So there are, each district would have guidelines. It's a little bit different than like a child care facility, which has specific child to adult ratios. I will say that schools try to have the right ratio of adults to students. But then for a special education, you have the right number of licensed people, and then also you could have paraeducators as well.
Well, I know at one time it was a 1-to-1, then it went to a 2-to-1, and then it went to a 2-to-2. And over the years, as parents have requested to have more pairs in the class or more assistants in the class, those guidelines and rules have changed over time. So that's something to look at, not only just from the state, but the federal guidelines, because you've got to follow both.
I would say a 1-to-1 would be required as part of that student's IEP because their disability was such that they needed that level of attention.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing your experience with us today. Do we have additional discussion? Representative Brantley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So you made me think here a little bit about the teachers. So are the teachers required to have like an ECU degree from birth to grade 3 with that special ed endorsement, and then the para in the room with them for the qualification of that preschool?
So this is where it can get complicated with braiding. So if the special education serving the student's IEP has to have the appropriate license to be considered for special education funding with that. Now, when you start to bring in other students, then there are different rules for how you do things for that. So that's where it gets complicated, that yes, you can have, just like you can for a kindergartner, the kindergartner teacher does not have to be a special education teacher. So you can have a pre-K teacher that doesn't have special education qualifications teaching, but the special education services have to be overseen by a special education teacher. That can be with the non-special education teacher or with a para, but the same rules apply for pre-K special education services that they would for K through 12.
Any follow-ups? All right, any other discussion? Representative Steele.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Is the child fined via the Part B, IDEA Part B, or is that a state statute?
No, child find is federal, so it would be, I don't know if it's part of, I mean, I don't know where it is in there, but that's
But
actually.
it's in the IDEA.
It's part of that, and it's identifying students that have special needs.
Is it, may I have a follow-up?
Yes, you may.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Is it common that in smaller school districts that these kids would be shipped to other school districts if they don't have?
So it's going
I'm
to.
just thinking like rural western Kansas and those small districts.
So it's going to depend on the student's needs and the ability for the district to provide for those needs as close as possible. So, I mean, IDEA says that you're supposed to be in the least restrictive environment, which you are as close to your home situation as you can be. The more severe the needs, the more likely that they would be transported someplace else to work that together. So it's kind of hard to answer, but in rural areas where you have sparse populations, you are more likely to have kind of just that student with that disability. And so having them with a specialist may necessitate travel, which is kind of true with almost every specialty when you get into some rural areas.
Thank you, Dr. Harwood. Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome. Interesting questions. I feel like I've learned a lot. I'm very thankful. Do we have any other questions?
Madam Chair, I just brought this for my own notes. This was something that our early childhood information sheet on funding. I will leave that with Michelle so that you guys can get copies of it.
We would love to get copies and
At
have
least
that
Elena can.
loaded up to Kayla's. Representative Hill. Frank, don't go anywhere. You've got one more question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Clarification, when you were, I think, answering Representative Neighbor's question, you said something about that the guidelines for staffing are unique for pre-K that are run by a school district, that they're not the same as a commercial daycare? Did I hear that right? Or
That is correct. I don't know that. So one of the things we hear often is, and you'll hear this from after-school programs that are considered childcare programs, have different restrictions on spaces they can use based on egress and all those other things than during the school day. So a classroom that you can have 35 sixth graders in during the school day, you can only have 15 sixth graders in after school because different rules. So the same thing applies with the pre-K programs. The same rules that apply to adult to child ratios that apply to a private or like a home daycare don't apply in the same way. Now, with Representative Neighbor's questions, you could be down to one-to-one if that's what that student's needs were, but that's not very often. So the school districts have more, I guess, leeway in adjusting the staffing to the needs of the group, especially if they braid things together where we have peer models or at-risk students in along with students with special needs.
okay, so let me try to put this in an example. So if a commercial daycare, if we're going to call them commercial daycare or whatever, one that is not connected to a school district, one adult can be supervising eight 4-year-olds. That doesn't necessarily apply. You might be able, is it more or less?
I don't know that there is a number necessarily there. I mean, so that would be a local decision by the school board.
Okay, thank you very much.
But I would say that that's why when we talk about with this bill, that there'd be a waiting list, because typically school districts are trying to serve as many people as they can, so they limit students that are not identified so that they can meet whatever those requirements they have for staffing.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Neighbor.
Thank you to your question, Mr. Hill, and call me out if I'm wrong, because many times. I worked with autistic behavior, 3 to 5-year-olds severe. That's where the numbers as far as per class went. But if you go to a Montessori school or a church preschool, they're going to have their guidelines, which is totally different. But we also, through daycare rules and regs, there are guidelines set for the ages and how many you can have in a daycare. And so that's a totally different realm. But, you know, you can have kids that need PT, speech, special needs kids in these 3 to 5 or in that group. I know I potty trained one for a number of years. There's all kinds of needs that go within that IEP and those child's needs. They also are provided special buses, small buses. That's at a cost to the districts because sometimes in many cases, you might have to have a para on that bus to suction that child to stay alive, to get to school, and to go home. So it's not an easy area just to classify and how many can be on there. But most of the time you have an assistant on the bus because my particular student liked to go barefoot on ice and snow, which I couldn't do that today. And so there are all kinds of needs that you have to be sitting there aware of and know how to engage them in activities that don't ruin the rest of your day and their day. So it's a very guided curriculum. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Representative Hill.
Yeah, just to be clear, I understand all the IEP and IDEA guidelines. I was really referring more to just normal pre-K kids. I mean, let me correct that. Children that do not, because the term normal is the incorrect term.
Not identified.
Yet not identified children. Thank you.
And Madam Chair, if I could follow, if you just want an interesting pre-K fact about transportation. So school districts can receive transportation reimbursement for the identified students. But if you pick up their neighbor who is a non-identified student and take them to the same place, you have to prorate your costs because the state won't pay for that child, even if there was an open seat on the bus. So just one of those things that's just interesting. And I realize that those rules are there for a reason, but it does cause, if the district says, no, we're not going to transport the non-identified student because we can't get reimbursed for it, now you've got this whole issue of community and all that kind of thing. So it's interesting.
Thank you so much. So I asked Elena to quickly take a look, and we believe for school ages 1 to 16 from KDHE. Okay, thank you very much. And when you're putting together kind of, if you can turn what we've talked about today into kind of a spreadsheet format and had a column for staffing requirements, I think that's something the committee sounds very interested in learning. So thank you both. I really appreciate everybody being here today. Would love to acknowledge our school board president, our state school board president, Kathy Hopkins, in the back row. Thank her for being here with us today. It's good to have you here. Is there anything else for the good of the order? Seeing none, you are adjourned early, and this might be our earliest because you guys like good questions. Have a wonderful day.